Hi, this is Tim from Morial TV and Morial Radio, here live from Pittsburgh with James Jacob Prasch, and this is This Week in Prophecy.
Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. Wonderful to be with you This Week in Prophecy. Hundreds of thousands of students. But for the first time, the Egyptian government is calling for an investigation into Al-Azhar University as a terrorist institution. Al-Azhar University, among other things, teaches the legitimacy, according to Islamic law, of cannibalism, of cannibalizing infidels, and also gruesome ways to torture infidels and non-Muslims to death, and the importance of raping and humiliating non-Muslim women. Now, if this is where your clergy are being educated and trained and sent out, you can understand why these things are happening. These rapes of women in Germany and Holland and Europe, why they're happening. Why these people who've been imported into the United States by the Bush administration and the Obama administration do what they do. This is their thinking, this is what they're trained to do, and this is where so many of their clergy are educated. Again, this is the primary institution for Islamic higher education in the world, in the Sunni world. Shia Muslims do not have high levels of education. They tend to be much lower and much more ignorant. But Sunnis do have university-level education, Al-Azhar University being the main one in the world this time. It is their gold standard. It is their Yale, their Princeton, their Harvard. It is their Oxbridge. According to the most recent data released by the Egyptian government, there were 297,000 students studying at Al-Azhar University just in 2013 and 2014, as well as 39,000 foreign students. These students are taught the theological legitimacy of cannibalizing infidels, gruesome ways to torture non-Muslims, and the importance of raping non-Muslim women. In 2015, El-Yom El-Sabbath, an Egyptian newspaper, published an investigative report about the curriculum at the university. According to the report, one of the books, translated to English, Convincing Arguments, according to Avi Shoga'ah, taught to Al-Azhar preparatory students, states any Muslim can kill an apostate and eat him, as well as kill infidel warriors, even if they are young or female, and they can also be eaten because they are not granted any protection. This is cannibalism. Killing non-Muslims and eating them. This is actually taught to Islamic clergy and future clergy. It's taught to preparatory students entering the university. So before you get there, you've already been groomed to this kind of thinking. Well, let us pray that the Egyptian government has its way, that this university is designated as a terrorist institution. It would have been unthinkable for this to happen at any other point. Let us pray that it is a symptom of the power of Islam cracking in the Middle East. Remember, the power of Islam has already cracked in the Far East. It is cracked in Indonesia, it is cracking in Malaysia, it is cracking in Bangladesh. The huge numbers of Muslims coming to faith in Jesus in Indonesia, the world's most populous country, is now heading in a Western direction rapidly towards the Middle East. We are seeing increasing numbers of Muslims saved in India, the world's second most populous Muslim country. And despite horrific persecution, there are increased numbers of Christians even in Pakistan. Well, may we see this kind of a breakthrough in Egypt. It would be tremendous if this university was closed down, but the very fact that we have the Egyptian government, for the first time, calling for an investigation of this institution for its terrorist ideology and its terrorist curriculum, is a significant statement and a significant indicator that something is happening. I believe, and I've always believed, that the same as we are going to see a harvest of souls among Abraham's children, the Jews, before Jesus returns. God is going to be gracious to Abraham's other children, the descendants of Ishmael, before Jesus comes. We will see an increase in the number of Muslims saved, including the number of Arab Muslims as descendants of Abraham. How many, I do not know. It'll be a long time, and not until the millennial reign of Christ will we see the wonderful prophecies of Isaiah chapter 19 fulfilled, where the Arabs will be worshiping the God of Israel together with the Jews. That will happen in the millennium. But in the meantime, more Muslims are being saved. It's happening in Asia. Please, Jesus, may it happen in the Middle East. What's taking place in Asia and certain areas of Africa can happen in the Middle East. If the power of Al-Azhar University is broken, it would be a major step forward, not just for the cause of Christ, but for the cause of Islamic and Islamic salvation, but for the cause of Arab civilization. It teaches and grooms people in a diabolical barbarism carried out in the name of religion. It's about time someone spoke out and praised God. That has happened. Let's move to France. The murder of Sarah Halimi. She was in an apartment building in an area of Paris where she had Islamic neighbors. One Islamic neighbor broke into her apartment and he was chanting and singing Islamic praises in Arabic while murdering her. The police were summoned. They heard her screaming, but there was a fear of interrupting his prayers, so they waited until she was dead before any move was made. That is the allegation. There's been a call by the French government for an investigation that will disclose the entire facts surrounding the behavior of the police. It's quite distressing to read this. Why France turned the blind eye to what was happening with Sarah Halimi. Please, Lord, may it be brought to the public attention. As usual, the left-wing press did not want to report it.
Le 4 avril, en plein Paris, à Belleville, une femme réveillée à 4 heures du matin par un barbare a été torturée, battue, mutilée pendant 45 minutes, puis défenestrée parce qu'elle était juive. Au cri d'Allahu Akbar, il l'a massacrée à poings nus, récitant des sourates du Coran, alors qu'en bas de l'immeuble, 26 policiers, 26, attendaient sans intervenir. Elle s'appelait Sarah Halimi, 65 ans, médecin, directrice de crèche et mère de 3 enfants. Elle avait très peur de son assassin, qui était son voisin depuis 20 ans. C'était un délinquant de 27 ans, musulman radicalisé d'origine malienne. Cette affaire aurait dû faire la une. Pourtant, quasiment pas un mot dans les médias, pas un mot durant la campagne présidentielle, bien loin du tsunami médiatique de l'affaire Théo. 2 jours après le drame, M. Attal, son frère, m'appelle avec émotion pour me demander de l'aide. Pendant 2 mois, j'ai prêché dans le désert. Le nom Halimi résonne hélas dans la communauté juive comme une plaie douloureuse qui s'ouvre à nouveau. Après Ilan Halimi, Sarah, 11 ans plus tard. C'est l'histoire d'un déni qui se répète. Déni face à l'antisémitisme arabo-musulman qui s'effrite dans nos quartiers sur fond d'islamisme, de préjugés anti-juifs, de haine de la France, de haine d'Israël. Elie Wiesel disait « Le silence encourage le persécuteur, jamais le persécuté. Quand un assassin tue une juive au cri d'Allahu Akbar, on devient sourd, aveugle, muet. Il aura fallu 3 mois pour qu'il soit mis en examen sans que le parquet ne retienne le caractère antisémite. Exit que l'assassin l'a traité de sale juive. Exit que Sarah était une juive orthodoxe. Je sais, la justice est indépendante, mais elle se trompe, pire, elle s'auto-censure. L'antisémitisme, comme l'antisionisme, son nouveau visage, sont les symptômes d'une société malade. Seule lueur d'espoir le 16 juillet, la commémoration du Veldiv, le président de la République a enfin demandé que toute la lumière soit faite. Pourquoi la police est-elle restée spectatrice de ce drame? Pourquoi le préfet de Paris refuse-t-il une enquête IGPN? Nous commémorons ce jour l'assassinat du père Hamel, pour qui j'ai une pensée à mon tour émue. Pourquoi ce silence assourdissant?
Merci, monsieur le député. La parole.
But it happened. It certainly did. This week in prophecy. Let's continue. Over to London, England. It was reported this week that a 5-year-old girl who was not Muslim was taken by social services in the Tower Hamlets, a predominantly Islamic neighborhood near the city of London, and twice handed over to Islamic families for fostering. They were wearing jihadis. They were wearing Muslim dress, fully facially covered. They told the little girl not to say things that were Christian, and began imposing Islam and Islamic beliefs upon her at the age of 5 with the backing of social services. This is completely contrary to British law, which says that the cultural and religious background of a child must be taken into consideration before placing them in foster care. But twice she was placed into the foster care of Islamic families who attempted to put Islamic beliefs on her. Then there was a verdict from an Islamic judge. The judge, when the matter was taken to court, was a Muslim. He was not recused. And it's most distressing what happened. Lawyers tried to stop the press from attending the court sessions. These lawyers for the Islamic interests attempted to stop newspapers from covering it. The Muslim foster family ridiculed the little girl's Christian beliefs, according to reports. The little girl cannot be named because of her age, but she was placed in foster care by the workers in the London borough of Tower Hamlets. Social services sent her to live with 2 Muslim families in 6 months. One family allegedly said she should remove her necklace bearing a cross and learn Arabic. This is what happened. This is what happened. The judge was a Muslim woman. Judge Khatun Satmara ordered the girl should be removed from the Muslim carers under political pressure. This is what's happening. Christians are being barred from fostering. The Guardian newspaper reported that Murtadd Versi, Assistant Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Great Britain, taking the Times newspaper to task, criticized the Times in a number of tweets. Demonization of the foreigner, especially the Muslim, is the clear undercurrent in this entire piece. It's appalling. All they did was report what happened. What they do is they follow the Alinskyist agenda, copying the Western left. Just scream Islamophobia. Just scream racism. Just scream sexism. Just scream homophobia. Just keep screaming it when you cannot deal with the facts. This is pure Alinskyism. But Islam has obviously learned the strategy from the West. Let's continue. With the near destruction of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, the winner appears to be Iran and Assad. A vacuum was created. After Saddam Hussein was removed in Iraq by the Bush administration, a vacuum was created. That vacuum was filled by Islamic militants. Once that was taken under management by General Petraeus, another vacuum was created. That became filled by ISIS once Barack Obama removed the remaining American troops, creating another vacuum and opening the door for ISIS to take root, which he basically mocked and ridiculed as a JV team. 48 hours later, they were perpetrating major terrorist attacks in Europe and then the United States. This is the JV team of Barack Obama who created the vacuum. Well, with the destruction of ISIS, the Islamic State, another vacuum is being created. And increasingly, both Assad, who's aligned with Iran, and Iran are filling it. Should the United States and the West begin attacking Iranian targets in Iraq and in Syria? Iran is trying to build its Islamic caliphate instead of the Sunni one of ISIS. That is what is taking place. Again, Daniel 10 shows its ugly head. Iran emerges as the potential enemy. Can it be forestalled? Yes, but the scripture says it will ultimately happen. We are speaking of an Islamic sphere of influence controlled from Iran that is largely Shia and Shia Alawite, which is a sect of Shia Islam, extending from Lebanon, from the area controlled by Hezbollah, through Syria, into Iraq to the Iranian border. This is easily as dangerous as ISIS. Moreover, Iran is increasingly developing weapons technology in the area of guided missiles and moving towards a nuclear capability courtesy of Barack Obama. This missile technology, however, which North Korea developed with the help of the Chinese, is obviously being put into play in the development of medium-range missiles inside of Iran. A very formidable enemy is taking root. This was the subject of discussions between Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin 2 weeks ago, as we discussed, but nothing of substance has come. We are on the cusp of seeing an Iranian arch semi-surrounding Israel on the north and on the northeast. It will extend again from the area under Kurdistan into Syria, and from eastern Syria through southern Syria all the way to Lebanon, especially southern Lebanon, threatening Israel on at least two fronts, the Golan Heights and the Lebanese border. Iran has this power. Israel has already attacked Iranian targets inside of Syria. I would personally be curious to know if the American government is thinking of attacking the Iranians and removing them as the next strategic threat to Western interest in that region once ISIS is gone. Unfortunately, General McMaster, the National Security Advisor, is an Obamaist in terms of his attitude towards Israel and the Middle East. Most of the conservatives are now gone from the Trump administration. Dr. Gorka having left this present week. There are very few conservatives left. There are more establishment people and an establishment Republican, and people who are left over even from the Obama era. Again, we continue to urge prayer for President Trump and Vice President Pence. We are in a very serious situation. The conservatives are losing any influence they had in the Trump administration, and this is being capitalized upon by Iran, who knows they can rely on people like McMaster to act in a way that will be beneficial to them and counter-beneficial to Israel. He looks upon Israel the way Obama did. This is not at all good. Please pray. There is a real danger, but what is being allowed to take root and take place with the growth of Iranian power and the Iranian sphere of influence, partially backed by Vladimir Putin, is wed to the policies of the Trump White House and the departure of so many conservatives from it and so many establishment figures who are no real friends of long-term American interest or Israeli interest. And I again would see an indictment of McMaster, a man who does not belong in the White House or in the National Security Council at all. That is what is taking place. Please watch this space. If the Iranian threat continues to grow the way it is, and if the Trump administration allows it by listening to people like McMaster, it may be a cause for Israel to have to take direct military action against Iranian targets and their surrogates, such as Hezbollah, in Lebanon and in Syria. Iraq, again, the void will always be filled by someone. It would have been better off if that void had been filled by pro-Western Kurds, the descendants of the ancient Medes. But at the moment, that is not what's happening. yes, the defeat of ISIS would seem like good news, much like the fall of Saddam Hussein would seem like good news. The question is what comes after it. Bush created a void. Obama created a void. Now Mr. Trump is creating a void. And every time a void has been created in northern Iraq, bad people build it. Mr. Bush had a bad national security advisor. Mr. Obama had a bad national security advisor. And Mr. Trump has a bad national security advisor. Please, once again, keep the Trump administration in serious prayer and watch Iran. Let's continue this week in prophecy. As most of the American media and public attention is focused on domestic issues due to Hurricane Harvey and the damage it is inflicting on the Houston area, things that normally don't happen are happening. For instance, normally pump prices for gasoline follow crude prices. But now crude prices are going down, but pump prices are going up. It's not a predictable market. It's a volatile market, and it's not a difficult one to understand, even though it's an anomaly. The oil is going into storage, which is driving crude prices down. Nonetheless, because the refining capacity has been reduced, it's driving prices at the pump up. This, again, is an unusual situation economically, but it has national repercussions. The cost of rebuilding Houston may be $160 billion, much of that largely because people did not have flood insurance. Now, we all can empathize with those people who are affected and afflicted. But the question becomes, why should other people, the taxpayers in other areas of the country, become liable for the fact that people who live in that area did not take out adequate flood insurance? When Hurricane Sandy devastated New York City and its environs in New Jersey, the elected officials of Texas and Congress did not support federal assistance for the people in New York who did not have adequate flood insurance. So now the question is being asked, why should people in New York bail out the Texans when the Texans did not want to bail out the New Yorkers? It's a fair question. Now, because so many believers are affected adversely by what happened with Hurricane Harvey, I have tremendous sympathy to them particularly. It's not a good thing for the country, and many of the people affected are believers. It has diverted national attention, and God has allowed it to happen, and He's allowed it to happen for a reason. But there's another hurricane that is brewing, Hurricane Irma. Let us pray that it does not hit the eastern United States, the Gulf Coast especially.
Well, nearly a week since Harvey hit, there is another weather worry on the horizon because of this. That swirling mass with the blood-red center is the next big storm, Hurricane Irma. It could be headed for the United States, possibly even eastern Canada. CBC meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff is with us again tonight. Johanna, where is Irma and how strong is it right now?
Well, Susan, the center of the storm is still about halfway between Western Africa and the Caribbean Sea. The center is over 2,000 kilometers east of the Leeward Islands, but this is a very strong storm already. A major Category 3 hurricane with sustained winds around that eye at about 200 kilometers per hour. This is the farthest east we've ever seen a hurricane form this early in the season. It still has to track through relatively cooler waters before it gets to the very warm waters around the Caribbean. And like Hurricane Harvey at one point, both these storms have intensified rapidly, going from tropical storm to major hurricane in less than 36 hours. But in the case of Irma, we're still at least 4 days away from any land impact.
It doesn't bode well. How much can we predict or even project? Could Irma hit the Gulf states, for example, or what about Canada?
Susan, a lot of uncertainty in the forecast track. So one to watch, but still a ways to go before we get a real handle on what this storm will do. I want to show you a range of forecast paths or various models showing what this storm could do. We have high confidence through to early next week. Once we get out to midweek, though, look at how these models diverge. We could see these storms track through the Caribbean towards the Gulf, or it may take a northern turn and track up that east coast towards Atlantic Canada. So one to keep an eye on, but still a lot of uncertainty in the path. Susan?
Okay, Johanna, thanks for all your help this week.
You're welcome.
I think it's foolish to see every hurricane as a divine judgment or a divine reaction to something. I really do. Nonetheless, we also have to understand that it is a way in which God speaks and God reacts. I can't see anything that I could directly attribute to being of apocalyptic significance to Hurricane Harvey. Nonetheless, its overall impact on the national economy is something that will take place within the greater plan of God. There's a reason for it happening. God has allowed this for some reason. What that reason is, I think, remains to be seen. I cannot see it as being a specific judgment for any specific wrong thing America did. There were things that were unwise that America has done, but nothing that I could see as specifically wrong as a judgment for a specific action, as happened to Theresa May in Great Britain. Nonetheless, let's move on. The United Nations, despite opposition from the USA and from Israel, is threatening or planning to publish a blacklist of Israeli companies that do business with Israel in the West Bank, that is Judea and Samaria. These include the American earth-moving equipment manufacturer Caterpillar. And there's a call for an international boycott based on human rights.
Rachel Corrie was an ISM volunteer. She was killed on March 16, 2003 in Rafah, Gaza, by an Israeli bulldozer sold to them by Caterpillar as she tried to protect a Palestinian home from being illegally demolished by the Israeli occupation.
We are here to show our support for the Jewish state of Israel. We're here to thank Caterpillar for their continued financial support for Israel and their continued trade agreements with Israel. Our opposition has shouted cruel, hatred, and racist statements all day, yet we have maintained a non-violent platform, and we are voicing peace through our neighbors. We are teaching we are speaking out for coexistence and peace in Israel. We are speaking of in Israel where Jerusalem as our capital, one state, Am Yisrael Chai, which means long live the Jewish state of Israel, from the north of the top of the Golan to the bottom of the Negev to Eilat, from east to west, with Jerusalem as our capital, from Tel Aviv all the way to the Red Sea and the Galilee. This is our land, this is our home, this is Am Yisrael.
See that girl with a flag? She walked into Gaza like that, dressed like that, and she wouldn't last for a while.
They would kill her.
The new Secretary General of the United Nations has called for more money to be put into Gaza. Well, first of all, any money you give to Gaza is not going to humanitarian aid only, or even mainly. It's going to be siphoned by Hamas for purposes of terror and jihad. No money should be given to Gaza, none, by the United Nations or by the USA or other Western countries via the United Nations. We should give them nothing. That money, if it's designated for humanitarian aid, should be coming from the oil-rich Gulf states, not from the West via the United Nations. No UN blacklist exists for Chinese companies guilty of gross human rights abuses against Christians and political dissidents. None exists against Iran or Saudi Arabia. Why are there no calls for boycotts of Saudi Arabian oil or Iranian oil? Why? The human rights abuses are much, much worse, and demonstrably so. This is obviously the usual hypocrisy and dual standards. But what should we expect from the United Nations? This week in prophecy, Mr. Abbas has essentially said to the American government that they're not going to alter their position. This week in prophecy. Abbas tells Trump he won't stop giving American money to terrorists.
White House advisor Jared Kushner resumed his effort to forge peace in the Middle East. Well, the president's son-in-law met with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem today before heading to Ramallah to sit down with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Kushner says the White House is very committed to achieving a deal, but the Palestinians have already begun complaining about the lack of progress. For more on Kushner's prospects and the rest of President Trump's foreign policy challenges, we're joined now by former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Ambassador, thanks for being here.
Glad to be with you.
All right, so I spent some time as a correspondent in the Middle East several years ago, and I came back and thought, this is an intractable problem. It ain't going to happen in my lifetime. Is there any better prospect now?
No is the short answer. I mean, good luck to the administration. You have to admire their intentions, but ultimately, peace between Israel and the Palestinians has to rest on some foundation in reality, and that doesn't exist now, given a variety of factors: the overall turmoil in the region, the absence of a legitimate Palestinian government or representative that can really speak authoritatively for the Palestinian people that has some veneer of democratic legitimacy. And I think just the impossibility of circumstances to allow Israel to accept on its borders terrorist states, more terrorist states, I should say, with no recourse other than self-defense when they're attacked. So I don't think it's going to happen.
You know, when the president was over there, he met twice with Abbas. He met with Netanyahu, and according to reports, neither one of them would give an inch. So, I mean, and the president was very specific in avoiding talking about a two-state solution, that Netanyahu's cabinet is dead set against a Palestinian state. So I don't see any grounds for a breakthrough.
Well, I don't think there are any grounds, and I think more fundamentally even than what we've discussed is the two-state solution. This whole concept has failed. The fact is that even if you could draw the boundaries of a Palestinian state, Gaza and some piece of the West Bank, it would not be viable. It would have no chance to have legitimacy from a representative government. I think the only way ahead for Palestinians, who have been the tip of the spear for radicals in the region for a long time, is have the Gaza Strip go back to Egypt and have some piece of the West Bank be retroceded to Jordan. That's the only chance for the Palestinians themselves to be attached to viable economies. So far, they don't want that, so we go nowhere.
Would Egypt or Jordan even go along with that?
Well, they wouldn't be happy about it. That's part of the problem. The Palestinian people have been weaponized for political purposes for so long that it's hard to imagine them being reunited. I think it's actually easier to imagine some form of Jordanian sovereignty on the West Bank than dealing with Gaza. The upside is that Hamas, the terrorist group that runs Gaza, is an affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood. So while the Egyptian government is dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood, here's their chance to deal with Hamas, too.
I mean, Hamas does have a political arm, but mostly they're just terrorists. And, of course, they don't agree at all with Abbas, whose seat of power is over in the West Bank, and he's unpopular even at home. And then you've got Netanyahu, who, you know, is under a corruption investigation that could result in an indictment. So the players are not even players, really.
Well, certainly on the Palestinian side, I'd say Netanyahu obviously has his travails, but one political development in Israel that's not well understood in the United States is that public opinion across the political spectrum, right, left, and center, has moved strongly against the idea of peace with the Palestinians just to say they've made peace. They understand the nature of the terrorist threat, and they're resigned to deal with it as best they can, but it won't be by giving the Palestinians their own state.
All right. Sometimes peace is simply unattainable, especially when one side is dominated by so many people who engage in acts of terrorism.
He's rejected American demands that he stop using foreign financial aid to pay stipends and salaries to the families of jailed Palestinian terrorists. Abbas met last week with U.S. envoys Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt as part of President Donald Trump's efforts to restart Middle East peace talks. According to the Israeli journalist present at the meeting, Kushner, who was Trump's son-in-law, reiterated the long-standing demand the Palestinian Authority not reward terrorism with financial gain. And Congress has repeatedly threatened to halt all financial aid to the Palestinian Authority over payment to jailed terrorists. Well, why doesn't the American government just do it? If the American government, and that includes the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and now the Trump administration, as it did the Clinton administration, if they continue to pander to Arab Islamic interests for the sake of oil, you are going to see more judgments on the American oil industry. As we saw in Hurricane Katrina with the rigs off of New Orleans, as we saw with the spillage, and as we are seeing now with the nation's biggest refinery in Beaumont, Texas, and in Port Arthur, Texas, being put out of commission. Houston is the center of the American oil industry. Now, again, I'm not saying there is a causal relationship, a cause and effect relationship, but I'm not saying there isn't. If America does not stop playing these games with Islamic terror, it will reap what it has sowed. Until now, God has been showing America benevolence, thanks to Mr. Trump. But this must stop. We must stop funding Islamic terror via the UN and other mechanisms. It's a waste of time talking to Abbas. He's a double-talking liar. There's nobody to negotiate with or talk with. It's ridiculous to have Mideast peace talks. There can be no peace with fundamentalist Islam. None. There can be a ceasefire, there can be a truce, but there cannot be peace. It's absurd to say there will be. They've been offered a Palestinian state in addition to the one that already exists. They were offered a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as the capital, but instead they unleashed a wave of terrorist bombing of bus stops, making it impossible for children to safely go to school. You cannot negotiate with these people. You've offered them everything they wanted, and it's still not good enough because they're driven by a religious ideology based on hatred and terror that moderate Muslims do not agree with or support. Yet you have people who are truly not moderate, but actually radicals pretending to be moderate. And the Western media plays directly into their hands. That has been taking place this week in Prophecy when Mr. Kushner met with Mr. Abbas. Quite a week, quite a series of issues, but let's look further. This week in Prophecy, a prominent Iran-linked imam has been detained on child pornography suspicion by the FBI. They raided the home of Shia cleric Mujahideen Abdul Karim in Watts in South Los Angeles, seizing his computer after surrounding the house. They handcuffed Abdul Karim and his family, and he reportedly has not as yet been charged, but his computer has been confiscated. Immediately, he began screaming that it was Islamophobia and anti-Islamic attack. But a copy of the search warrant has been obtained, and the investigating agent's affidavit reveals that between 2013 and 2017, the FBI determined that Karim or another individual at the subject's premises, his house, was searching for and viewing child pornography on the internet. The order's description of the internet searches is extremely disturbing. It was not an act of Islamophobia. It was an act of protecting children from child pornographers. Remember, in Iran, sex with underage girls is permissible. Ayatollah Khomeini said to take a little girl's virginity before her first blood. In other words, before she has her first menstrual period, somebody should have sex with her. This is their teaching. He's only living out the teachings of that to which he subscribes. And of course, if you disagree, you're an Islamophobe. You're a bigot. That's all they can do is yell accordingly. Let's move on. Despite the growth of Islamic fundamentalism under the Erdogan government and increasingly prominent pushes for Sharia in Turkey, the Islamicization of Turkey has not stopped Turkey from making formal application for EU membership. In the past, Turkish membership of the EU was supported by David Cameron, the supposed conservative Prime Minister of Great Britain, who wanted Britain and Europe overrun by Turkish immigrants. Turkish desires to join the EU have dragged on literally for decades. They have been blocked in the past by Turkey's traditional enemy, Greece, who obviously, for historical reasons, does not want Turkey in the EU, given the Turkish seizure of part of Cyprus. Even though they're only 15% of the population, they took 40% of the land by military force. And the fact that areas of coastal Turkey, that is Western Turkey, had formerly been Greece and part of Greece, but they were simply grabbed by Turkey in acts of military incursion and simply declared to be Turkish turf. This is a long story and a history that goes back many centuries of Turkey, Greece, and the Balkans being opposed to each other, with Turkish invasions having even reached as far as Vienna in the 16th century. It is a centuries-long battle. The present strategy of the Erdogan government is to make those gains now by entering the European Union. Again, we see this battle as spiritual. But when you have people like Angela Merkel and David Cameron, leaders of Western European countries, pandering to Turkey, even at a time when they have a leader like Erdogan, we have a serious issue. Pandering to Islamic immigration, even as the rape of European women and British women increases at the hands of Islamic immigrants. The governments of these countries are acting against the interests of their own citizens. Again, we point to a country like Denmark, a 4% Islamic population, but 40% of the people on public benefit, that is the dole, welfare, are Muslim, even though they're only 4% of the population, they get 40% of the welfare. 70% of the convicted terrorists in prison, 70% of the convicted rapists in Denmark are Muslim, and over 90% of their victims are Danish. But we're supposed to ignore hard statistical facts, according to Angela Merkel, who's likely to be re-elected in Germany. According to David Cameron, who's fortunately gone. Something is happening. Again, Islam is God's judgment. I do thank God for countries like Poland who are standing up. Again, it was the Poles who saved Europe from an Islamic invasion when, under King Jan Sobieski, the Islamic invaders were turned back on the outskirts, the very gates of Vienna. Without the Poles, the Muslims would have Islamized Europe centuries ago. But now they are attempting to do so again. And Poland is one country standing up and speaking out, as is Hungary. But why do you have these treasonous policies in Western Europe to pander to these people? Because of the Greek opposition, it is not likely that Turkey will be able to enter the European Union unless the bankruptcy of Greece is played on politically. And the Germans, Merkel says to them, no more aid for you. We will let your economy collapse unless you change your opposition to Turkey's membership. Do not think that Merkel is not capable of such treachery. Germany is reverting increasingly to its Nazi past. We reported how a judge declared that radical Muslims who burned down a synagogue were only acting politically against Zionism and not anti-Semitically against Jews. Last week, the mayor of Berlin allowed radical Islamic organizations carrying Stars of David with X's through them to march in a parade in Berlin. The rise of neo-Nazism in the form of Islam is increasing in Germany, and doing so with the blessing of German politicians. This will bring God's judgment on Germany once again. You know, it was Germany who built walls around the Jewish ghettos, and any Jew climbing over the wall was machine gunned. Therefore, a wall was built around the capital of the Reich, and any German climbing over the wall was machine gunned. Not until Hermann Hesse died in Spandau prison, the last Nazi responsible for the Holocaust and the Blitz, did one brick of that prison, of that wall, come down. The Germans are playing a very dangerous game. Once again, they're poking their fingers into the apple of God's eye by reverting to their anti-Semitic history, even getting in bed with Muslims. Remember, it was Hitler who had parlance with the Mufti, senior Islamic clergyman in the Middle East, their great archbishop. Hitler met with the Mufti. Why? Because of the hatred of Jews. Well, things have not changed much. It has happened before, and it's happening again. Please pray that God intervenes in Germany. There is much dispute in the world today of aeronautics and defense contracting as to whether or not the American F-35 and F-22 are going to be effective against the latest generation of Russian and Chinese aircraft. Well, Israel likes the F-35 so much, it's buying 17 more. The Middle East has always been a proxy experimentation battlefield where American aeronautic technology and American aircraft, McDonnell Douglas manufactured, Northrop, etc., tested their goods against MiGs, Russian-made MiGs. Americans have been able to improve their design technology based on Israeli combat experience, and it is still happening. The F-35 is a very promising aircraft. It has its drawbacks, but its overall air-to-air combat capabilities have impressed the Israelis significantly. The Israelis do not generally make mistakes in the area of air-to-air combat. And their confidence is plainly in the F-35. This week in prophecy, the media continues its senseless and idiotic attacks on Donald Trump, talking about stupid things like his wife's shoes. Or racializing hurricanes. They have nothing to say and they can say nothing, so they invent things to say. It goes on and on and on. Nobody's paying attention to them anymore. They're losing credibility. But as they've lost credibility, they've been forced to realize it. Well, people screamed out from the left and the left-wing media and the Democratic Party leadership against Donald Trump by his saying there was blame on both sides in Charlottesville, which in fact there was. Now Nancy Pelosi has said the same thing concerning Antifa. Dianne Feinstein is likewise making similar statements. The Democratic Party leadership realizes that by gravitating so far to the left and giving platform and expression and endorsement to these people, as Barack Obama did with the Occupy Wall Street movement and with Black Lives Matter, they are hurting themselves electorally and politically. But it is too late. The Democratic Party has gone too far to the left to return to the centrist Democratic Party of JFK, of Scoop Jackson, and of Sam Nunn. Senator Joseph Lieberman was the end of the sane access of the Democratic Party of the centrists. The left has gained too much power. And even if people like Feinstein and Pelosi or Schumer try to make readjustments, they're not going to be able to do so anytime soon. The Democratic Party has lost every congressional election since the election of Mr. Trump, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next midterm congressional elections. They're in disarray. The Democratic Party is now visibly divided against itself, as are the Republicans. You have the establishment Republicans opposing the conservatives and Mr. Trump. And now you have a division likewise within the Democratic Party. It is all divided. All divided. I would see these divisions as emblematic of the division of the general society. Ultimately, there will be fear and anxiety among the nations, none of them knowing the way out. We, however, will indeed have a way out, and that way out will be the Lord Jesus. I hope I don't upset him, but there are two people who tell much truth, who show much courage, and above all, they show much integrity. They are both Jewish. One is David Horowitz, who, like myself, was once upon a time left-wing, who realized the lies he was being told and moved from a left-wing position to a conservative position. The other is Ben Shapiro. Both of these men are Jewish. I love Jewish people, and I love Jewish conservatives, just as I love black conservatives who've seen through the nonsense. I love people like Dr. Alan Keyes. I love black people like Professor Walter Williams or like Dr. Thomas Sowell. I love black people like Larry Elder and Star Parker. I love them. I love them. I watched a video clip by a very eloquent and intelligent young black woman called Red Pill Black Girl. Marvelous what she says. She came to the common sense realization. I also watched the clip by a former Black Panther, the old Black Panthers from the times of Bobby Seale and Huey Newton in the 60s when I was a Black Panther supporter, who saw through it and came to a conservative position.
Well, Congressman John Lewis of Georgia is being cast as the undisputed champion of black America, standing in opposition to Donald Trump on behalf of all African Americans. But Lewis does not speak for all African Americans. Mason Weaver used to be a Black Panther, for example. He now says Lewis is a, quote, civil rights turncoat who's collaborating with the Democratic Party to oppress black America. Mr. Weaver joins us now to explain what he means. Mr. Weaver, thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Really, my pleasure.
So what did you mean by that?
Well, you know, in the early 70s and late 60s, we were demonstrating and protesting for the right to compete as adult citizens in America. We were not demonstrating to be taken care of better. Now, Congressman Lewis, he marched across the Pettus Bridge, and they beat him and ran over him. But those were Democrats. It was Democrats. George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse yard. It was Democrats, Bull Connors, that oppressed folks. It was Democrats that voted for the litmus test called the literacy test and the poll tax. He was fighting Democrats. But after they beat his behind on that bridge and ran over him and stomped him on the ground, he got up and turned and joined them. He joined the oppressors and became a stooge for them, where he was now sitting and presiding over the destruction of the black community, the destruction of the black men, the destruction of the black woman with drugs and gangs. He has presided over the worst school system in the world, where black people are learning only to be gang prep. So I'm outraged that the demonstration that he had early in his life has turned into a subjugation of his rights and authority as a black leader.
So when you say he's presided over, are you speaking of his congressional district?
Not just his congressional district, but the Congressional Communist Black Caucus that has every district they own and control is a ghetto hellhole. It's a place that no one wants to go to. They're in control of every inner-city school system, every inner-city police, every inner-city jail. They have produced nothing but drugs and misery. Black-owned businesses, black-owned housing has been reduced. They have presided over the destruction of black people. They should be ashamed of themselves, and I don't understand why any black person could be a Democrat.
Huh. Interesting. So you believe that John Lewis, when he gets up and says anything, is already discredited because of what he's failed to do since the civil rights era?
He has done nothing. John Lewis, bless his heart, it took courage to do what he did in early life. But what he has done now, he has turned himself to his enemy, like a little girl being beaten by daddy and joins daddy, like an abused woman beaten by her husband, she joins the husband. He has joined the enemy. He has joined the oppressor. And what he should do, if you're a real man, John Lewis, if you're a real hero, you stand up tomorrow morning and you look at the American people and you apologize. You have led them through decades of hell. You should apologize, say you made a mistake, say that you tried to work with them, but the Democratic Party has always been the party of abuse, always been the party of the Klan, the party that went to war to keep slaves, the party that's always been the destruction of black people. Mr. Lewis, you have presided over the destruction of black America, and you owe us an apology. And by the fact, you're more concerned, he's more concerned about Trump being the illegitimate president, but John Lewis is the illegitimate congressman.
So presumably you don't believe that John Lewis is doing this on purpose, or that other members of the Congressional Black Caucus are doing this on purpose, do you?
That's why I love you so much, Tucker. You're so kind, you're so genuine, but I know that you hate BS. So I'm going to tell you, all I've seen that he has gotten enriched, his people have gotten poor. The Black Caucus has gotten more power and influence, and the black people that preside over has gotten poor. More drugs, more gangs, less business, less home ownership, less education, more jail, more drugs. Now, if you did that in your job, you'll be fired. If you did that in any place else, you'll be fired. The worse black people are, the poorer we are, the stronger the Congressional Black Caucus is, the more powerful Democrats are, the worse off black people are. So I'm just saying, as a citizen of America, looking around my country, I'm saying that every place you find black people and Democrats, you find poverty. Now, wait for someone to say, well, I'm wrong. You find disgrace, you find degradation, you find no jobs, you find a place that is utterly unlivable. That's his legacy.
Huh. Mason Weaver, not a mincer of words. Thanks for joining us tonight with your perspective.
Stay right.
Appreciate it.
Stay right. We got to just stay right. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a tremendous respect for such people, Dr. Ben Carson, etc. Well, I likewise have a tremendous respect for Jewish conservatives. David Horowitz, who came from the left as I did, Ben Shapiro, even Ben Stein, who I briefly met once in Los Angeles. I don't always agree with them, but I usually do, and like them very much. These men have courage and integrity. They're all Jewish. Please pray for Mark Levin, Jewish. Please pray for Michael Savage, Jewish. Please pray for Ben Stein, Jewish. Please pray for David Horowitz, Jewish. Please pray for Ben Shapiro, Jewish. I love these guys and I respect them. And I'm sorry if I'm offending them. But there is a question. Is Yeshua, is Jesus the Jewish Messiah or not? If he is their Messiah, May he open their eyes, and may they show the same kind of courage and integrity on spiritual and theological issues that they've shown on political and social issues. I know they're men of courage and integrity when they address social and political issues. May they demonstrate that same kind of courage and integrity in asking the question, is the Jew Jesus, Rabbi Yeshua bar Yosef, is he the Mashiach, according to the prophecies of the Hebrew Scriptures? Kaha Sheila, hu ken uhu lo Meshichecha, Meshichenu. Rav Yeshua bar Yosef Minat said it. Yeshayahu Nun Gimel. Daniel Hanavi Perek Tesha. The prophets, Daniel chapter 9, the Messiah would have to come and die before the second temple would be destroyed. HaMashiach hitzterek lavo v'lamut lifnei ha'harban shel bet hamikdash hashemit. The Targum Yonatan, Eliyahu, Kakaliah, they all agreed Isaiah 52 and 53 is about the suffering servant Messiah, Ben Ephraim, HaMashiach ben Yosef. Read Zechariah chapter 12. Please, I'm only asking for prayer for these men. They have courage and integrity in looking at the issues and analyzing the facts objectively. What they're doing in the political and social realm is crucial. It's vital. I have nothing but respect and high regard for Michael Savage, for Mark Levin, for Ben Shapiro, for Ben Stein, for David Horowitz. Nothing but high regard for them in the temporal sphere. But even more important is the eternal sphere. The theological questions are more important than the political ones, even though the two may be related. The spiritual issues are more important than the social ones, although the two may be related. Please pray for these Jewish guys. They've seen through the nonsense that has bamboozled so many Jews for so long. May they ask the question based on the evidence. Their evangelical friends are partners very often politically, on the same page, following the same compass. Are their evangelical friends right about the Jewishness of Jesus and his teaching? Now, again, I love these guys, and my love for them and my agreement with them politically does not depend on their theological views. But this week in prophecy, I would urge, strongly urge, all of our viewers who are believers to pray for the salvation of these outstanding Jewish minds who are standing up and telling the truth about the way the world is going. They know the way the world is going, but only their own Hebrew scriptures can tell them why. That has been This Week in Prophecy. My name is Jacob Prasch. God bless and thank you for listening.